When a Hells Angels president opened his door at 2 in the morning, a 6-year-old in pajamas was standing there. I didn't know where else to go, she said. She'd been locked outside since yesterday, 46 degrees, no coat, 3 blocks alone in the dark. In the backpack, she was gripping against her chest her dead father's estate documents, a rain-damaged birthday card, and evidence that would expose a county official who had already done this once before. Thursday, 9 in the morning, 6 hours away. After that, the filing was irreversible. What 147 Hells Angels did before sunrise is the part nobody saw coming. Now let me take you back to Wednesday morning, 17 hours before Renly knocked on Reaper's door to the first person who saw her and kept driving. The mail truck came at 9:15. Renly Claire Calloway had been sitting on the front porch steps since breakfast. She was 6.5 years old. Pink fleece pajama top with bears on it, the left sleeve torn at the cuff from the last time the door had closed before she got all the way through. Navy cotton pajama pants. Indoor rubber sandals that made a soft shuffle tap sound when she walked. And her backpack. Always the backpack now. Ever since Tuesday night. Ever since she'd heard the phone call. Her Uncle Foster had unlocked the door long enough that morning to set a bowl of cereal on the kitchen table and tell her to eat quickly. Then he'd taken his keys and his briefcase and his pressed county services polo, the one with the department logo on the chest, and he'd gone to work. To the office where he spent his days deciding which homes were safe for children. The front door locked behind him with a click she had learned to dread. She watched the mail truck slow at the end of the driveway. Dale Whitaker, 58 years old, 22 years on this route, leaned forward and pulled back from the box. He looked up the drive. He saw her. She watched him look at her. She didn't wave. She wasn't sure if she was supposed to. He looked back at his clipboard. He drove on. Later, he would tell investigators, "I figured she was just playing." He would say it quietly, looking at his hands as though he already understood that the words didn't hold up under examination. She was wearing pajamas at 9 in the morning. She was 6 years old. She was sitting alone on a porch with a backpack in her lap, and she watched him drive away, and she didn't run after him. Not because she'd given up, not yet. Because she'd learned in 11 months that adults were usually in a hurry to be somewhere that wasn't here. The temperature was 51 degrees by 2:40 in the afternoon when the school bus stopped at the corner of Blackwater Road. She heard the doors open in the rush of children's voices. A knot of 4 parents stood near the crosswalk, 3 women and 1 man waiting for the last bus of the day. One of them looked across the road and saw Renly still sitting on the porch steps. A woman in a down vest crossed the road. She crouched down, asked Renly's name, asked where her mother was. "My mother's gone," Renly said. "My uncle's at work. The door is locked." The woman patted the top of her head. One firm pat, the kind that meant the conversation was almost over. "Ring the doorbell until your uncle answers, sweetie. That's what doorbells are for." She crossed back to the group. They discussed it briefly. Nobody stayed. Nobody knocked on Foster Graves' door. They drove away. Renly pressed the doorbell 4 times. It made a sound inside the empty house that nobody answered. She went back to the porch steps. She put her hands through the backpack straps and held on. She touched the birthday card through the canvas. Still there. She checked it 7 times today. She watched the street go quiet. She reached into the pocket of her jacket and found the crackers she'd saved from breakfast. She ate half of it. She put the other half back. You never knew when you'd need it later. That was something she'd learned in 11 months. Save what you can. You don't know when the next meal comes. At 6:20 in the evening, a car slowed and stopped. A man got out. Nice clothes, silver at the temples, the kind of face you see on campaign signs. His name was Councilman Pruitt, 61 years old, on his way home from a dinner. He crouched down in front of Renly. He looked genuinely concerned. He told her he was going to help. He took out his phone and dialed right in front of her. Then he handed it to her and said, "Say hello to your uncle." Her uncle's voice on the line was smooth and calm, the way it always was when someone else was listening. He told her to tell the nice man she was fine, that he'd be home soon. She said the words. She handed the phone back. "Sounds like he'll be home soon," Sweetheart Pruitt said. He patted her shoulder. He walked back to his car. As he pulled away, she heard him say to his aide, "Kids that age exaggerate. She's fine. Foster's one of the good guys." Foster came home 40 minutes later. He did not unlock the front door. He brought Renly a cracker and a cup of water through the garage door, crouching, not looking at her directly, then relocked it and went inside. She heard the deadbolt slide home. That sound, the one that meant she was staying outside. The one she heard in her sleep now, even when she wasn't locked out. She ate the cracker. She drank the water. She sat on the porch steps as the October dark came in around the edges of the yard. She'd been outside since 7:30 that morning. It was now past 7 at night, 46 degrees, ground fog building along the road. And what she was thinking, what a 6-year-old thinks when she's been given too much time alone and too many reasons not to trust wasn't someone will come. She was past that. She was thinking, which direction is the light I can see from here? 6 months ago, Renly had been lying on the cot in the laundry room, the place where Foster made her sleep when he said she'd been difficult. The house had been quiet. She thought he was asleep. Then she'd heard his voice through the wall, on the phone, talking to someone. The words had come through muffled but clear enough. Amber ran away, that's what the file says, just like this one will say. She hadn't understood all of it. She was only 6 then, but she understood Amber was a name, a girl's name, and this one meant her, Renly. And ran away sounded bad when Uncle Foster said it like that, like it wasn't true, like it was something he was going to make people believe. She'd pulled the thin blanket up to her chin and stared at the ceiling and tried not to move, not to make a sound, because if he knew she'd heard, she didn't know what would happen. The next morning, he'd unlocked the laundry room door and told her to get dressed for school like nothing had happened. But she remembered. She remembered every word. And when she'd found the papers in his office 2 weeks later, the ones with the court seal and her name and her father's name, she'd taken them. She'd put them in her backpack, and she'd kept them there hidden under her school folders every single day since. Because she didn't know what they meant, but she knew they were important. She knew Uncle Foster kept asking her where they were. She knew he'd torn apart her room looking for them twice. And she knew that as long as she had them, she had something he wanted, something he needed. That was the only power she had. She started walking at 10. The shuffle tap of her indoor sandals on the pavement was the only sound on Blackwater Road. No cars, no porch lights, just the cold and the low-lying fog and the narrow sliver of moon that didn't do much about either. She couldn't call anyone. The landline was gone from the kitchen. Foster had removed it 6 months ago, no phone of her own. She couldn't go to a neighbor's house. The last time someone on this road had tried to help the police had come and her uncle had spoken to them at the door and nothing had changed. And the neighbor had been told she was interfering. But she could see from the corner of Blackwater Road a light through the trees, amber yellow, steady, the kind of light that meant someone was still awake. She walked toward it. The smell reached her before the house did, motor oil and cold concrete and the faint trace of wood smoke from a chimney 2 lots over. A garage where someone worked late the way her father used to work late. And for a moment she stood very still at the edge of the driveway and just breathed it in. The way you breathe in something that reminds you of before. Daddy used to smell like this, she whispered to no one. Then she walked to the front door. 3 small knocks, a child's knock, not a fist, nothing demanding, just 3 small taps, the sound of someone who wasn't sure they had the right to be heard. She waited. 3 more. Gideon Vance had been in his garage for 3 hours working on a carburetor, coffee gone cold on the workbench. He'd been meaning to go to bed since midnight, but some nights were like that. The quiet pressed in from the wrong direction, and the only thing that helped was keeping his hands busy. His dog Titan told him first. Not a bark. Titan didn't bark at things he understood. He just lifted his head and turned it toward the front of the house, patient and sure, and that was enough. Reaper set down the carburetor, wiped his hands on the shop rag, walked through the kitchen, opened the front door. He looked at chest height, First, the way a man who stands 6'3" always has to remind himself to correct. Then he looked down. She was standing at the edge of the porch light, both hands gripping the backpack straps against her chest. Indoor sandals, pink pajama top, auburn curls matted from where she'd slept on the porch steps. She looked up at him and did not run. He noticed immediately that her eyes went to his hands before his face, checking what he was holding, checking if his hands were a threat. He held them open, loose at his sides. "I've been outside since yesterday," she said. "My uncle locked me out. I didn't know where else to go." 9 words in the first sentence. Then she stopped. No crying, no performance. Just a statement of fact from a child who had spent 11 months in 17 hours deciding whether to trust one more adult, and had decided with whatever was left in her after all of that to try one more time. The restraint was what broke through. It didn't ask for sympathy. It just reported what happened. That was more devastating than any plea. He took one step back from the doorway, not toward her, just back, creating space. Then he lowered himself slowly, one knee on the floor. Titan padded to the door and sat beside him. "Then you come inside where it's warm," Reaper said. She looked at him for 3 full seconds, calculating, deciding. Her eyes went from his hands to his face to the dog to the light behind him. Then she crossed the threshold. He stood up after her, not before, so she was never in his shadow. He got a blanket first, heavy wool from the chest in the hallway. He didn't wrap it around her. He set it on the couch beside her so she could choose. She chose. He put the kettle on, found cocoa at the back of the cabinet, moved quietly the way a large man learns to move in a small space when he doesn't want something small to feel cornered. He sat in the chair across from her. Not close. Across. "What's your name?" "Renly Calloway." He nodded, filing it carefully. "How old are you?" "Renly 6.5. "All right," he said. "You're safe here. Nobody's making you go anywhere tonight. You understand that?" Her chin wobbled just once, then went still again. "Okay," she said. It was 2:09 in the morning, Thursday. The clock above the stove read the time in green digits. Reaper saw it and began doing math. She talked slowly, carefully, in the complete sentences of a child who has rehearsed what she would say to the first adult who actually listened. He said, "I'd get what I deserve after the papers," Renly said. He said that a lot. "I don't know what papers." Reaper didn't react. Inside, something had gone cold and deliberate. "He made me take my backpack when he locked me out," she continued. "Daddy's papers are in there. He kept asking me where they were. I took them a long time ago." She was still holding the backpack in her lap, both hands on the straps. "Can I look at those papers?" Reaper asked. She considered it, really considered it, the full weight of the decision visible on her face. Then she lifted the flap, reached inside, and brought out a folded envelope and a document printed on heavy stock with an official seal at the top. Then carefully a birthday card, water-stained across the upper half, the ink blurred to nothing on the top 2 lines. She held that one herself while she handed him the rest. He unfolded the documents on the kitchen table. Trust instrument, Telfair County Family Court, Probate Division, Calloway Estate, beneficiary Renly Claire Calloway. Date of birth, he did the math, 6.5 years old. He turned to the back page. He found the filing deadline. Thursday, 9 in the morning. He looked at the clock above the stove. 2:17, 6 hours and 43 minutes. He set the papers down flat. He looked at Renly. She hadn't looked up from the birthday card in her hands. "He talked on the phone 2 nights ago," she said. "He talked about a girl named Amber. He said she ran away. And the file says that, and that's all it says. He talked about me the same way." She looked up then. "I think he knows I hurt him." What he didn't know yet, what that single name would lead to, was the reason this story doesn't end with a probate filing. But he knew enough. He knew a 6-year-old child had walked 3 blocks in the dark to knock on the door of a stranger, because every system designed to protect her had pointed her back toward the man hurting her. He knew she'd been outside for 17 hours in 46-degree weather because a county official, a mail carrier, four parents at a bus stop, and a city councilman had all seen her and decided she wasn't their problem. He knew the documents in front of him had a filing deadline in less than 7 hours. And if that filing went through, whatever was left of this child's inheritance would disappear into the same void that had already swallowed $255,000. And he knew one more thing. He knew what happened to children who heard too much and asked too many questions. He knew because Renly had just told him. A girl named Amber. The file says she ran away. The file says. Not she ran away. The file says she ran away. A 6-year-old had just decoded the language of institutional cover-up, and she'd done it because she'd had 11 months to learn that what adults said and what was true were often two different things. Reaper stood up. "Stay here," he said. "Don't open the door for anyone but me." He walked to the back of the house. He picked up his phone. The call to Carrick lasted 41 seconds. Carrick. "You up?" A pause. Shuffling. A man who slept light because he'd spent 11 years wearing a badge, and that habit doesn't leave you. "Yeah, I need you. Bring whoever's close. Don't say where you're going yet." Another pause. Carrick Dune had known Reaper's voice in every register it came in. This was the quiet one. The one that meant he'd already looked at it from every angle and decided there was no version of this where they stayed home. How bad? 6 years old, Reaper said. "We have less than 7 hours." The line went dead. Carrick made 4 calls in the next 8 minutes. Each lasted under 30 seconds. Each ended the same way. 6 years old, 7 hours, Reapers. By 3 in the morning, 12 men were in the driveway. They stood in the amber glow of the garage light engines, ticking cool, not speaking. No explanation had been given. None was needed. The chapter president had called them in the middle of the night, said a child's age, and given a countdown. That was the whole story. Carrick came through the door first. Real name Carrick Dune, 49 years old, 11 years as a Telfair County deputy, before he'd concluded there were more effective ways to protect people and more honest ones. He still knew every probate clerk in the county by first name, knew which judges rotated into the morning session on Thursdays, and knew the layout of the courthouse filing window, the way a man knows a place he's watched from the outside for years, waiting for the right moment to walk in. He sat down across from the trust documents and read without speaking for 6 full minutes. Then he looked up. If the filing goes through at 9, the transfer is permanent under Georgia probate statute. She has no legal representative. He's filing as guardian administrator. There is no automatic challenge mechanism for a minor under the age of 10. He paused. "We need an emergency injunction filed before his attorney reaches the courthouse at 7. That means we need a probate attorney on the phone before 5. Reaper nodded once. "Who do we have?" Beckett arrived at 3:12. Real name Beckett Morrow, 44 years old, 7 years as a combat medic in the Army, 3 tours, came home to Hatchfield and never quite lost the habit of walking into a room and immediately calculating its casualties. He went directly to Renly. He didn't ask her medical questions. He asked if the cocoa was good. She said it was okay, a little sweet. He said he agreed. Reaper always made it too sweet. Something almost like a smile moved across her face and was gone. While they talked, his eyes moved over her the way only someone with his training could do without making it obvious. Ear temperature, skin color at the wrists, the slight protective hunch in her posture that comes from hours in the cold and months of learning to take up less space. The bruise on her knee, old untreated. The scabs along her shins in a pattern that spoke of repeated falls without anyone checking afterward. The fingernails bitten to nothing. He caught Reaper's eye across the kitchen and gave one small, deliberate nod. "She's okay for now." The 2-word qualifier hung in the air between them without being spoken. Thorne came in at 3:20 with a thermos of coffee and the expression of a man who had seen this shape of evil before and knew exactly which forms it filled out. Real name Thorne Hayes, 51 years old, 8 years as a state social worker. He'd filed more child welfare reports than he could count. watched more of them disappear into the same departments he had filed them through, and eventually decided that wearing a lanyard and calling it justice was a kind of lie he couldn't keep telling himself. He sat down near Renly without making a production of it. He was the one the chapter sent in when a child needed to tell their story to an adult who already knew the system's language because he'd learned it from the inside and understood exactly how it got used against the people it was supposed to protect. He looked at the trust documents over Carrick's shoulder. "I know what these forms look like," he said quietly. "Filed about 1,000 of them. And I know what it means when they come back stamped, reviewed, no action required." He set the thermos down. "It means the person who reviewed it worked with the person who filed it." Lysander arrived at 3:28 with his laptop already open. Real name Lysander Flint, 38 years old, 6 years in cybersecurity for a defense contractor before the chapter found him. Or he found the chapter depending on who was telling the story. What was consistent across every version, he could navigate financial records the way Carrick navigated courtrooms. Quickly, precisely, without leaving footprints. He set the laptop at the far end of the kitchen table and began typing without being asked. Boone didn't announce himself. He was simply there at 3:35 at the end of the driveway, standing in the ground fog facing the road. Real name Boone Briggs, 56 years old, former military police. He had the rare gift of communicating everything he needed to communicate without speaking. He positioned himself at the end of the drive and didn't move. No one thought to give him another assignment. No one who looked at him doubted he was exactly where he needed to be. Now you might be imagining what it looks like when 12 Hell's Angels arrive in a residential neighborhood at 3 in the morning. You might be picturing something loud. Something that looks like confrontation. That's not what this was. It was 12 men in a driveway standing quietly listening. A former deputy reading trust documents by lamplight. A former combat medic checking a child's temperature without alarming her. A former social worker pulling up county records on his phone. A tech specialist tracing financial withdrawals in real time. The scariest looking group of people in Hatchfield, Georgia, was assembled in one kitchen. And not one of them raised their voice above the hum of the refrigerator. That's the part people never expect. That's the part that matters. Thorne had the county records up inside 20 minutes. What they showed was the architecture of a system that had not simply failed. It had been pointed in the wrong direction on purpose. First failure, 6 months ago. Renly's first grade teacher, Mrs. Carol Glendon, 47 years old, who had been watching this child show up in the same clothes 3 days running and eating quickly at lunch and saving food in her jacket pocket, had filed a formal child welfare concern with the Telfair County Department of Family Services. The report had been received, assigned to a caseworker, forwarded up the chain. The chain led directly to Foster Graves' own department. 10 days later, the report came back. Reviewed, no action required, no visit, no follow-up call to the school. No one had gone to 624 Blackwater Road to look at where Renly Calloway was sleeping. Second failure. 7 months into Foster's guardianship, Renly's pediatrician, Dr. Hollis Strand, had flagged her weight at a routine checkup. 11 pounds underweight for her age. Dr. Strand had documented it in the chart, requested a mandatory follow-up in 30 days, and expected the system's enforcement mechanisms to function. Foster had never brought Renly back for that appointment. The enforcement mechanism had not triggered. The appointment sat in the chart. Overdue, no contact made. Third failure. A neighbor named Maeve Sims, 71 years old, a retired school teacher who had lived on Blackwater Road for 30 years and knew what a child in trouble looked like, had called the non-emergency line twice. Once about shouting from the house, once about seeing Renly alone in the backyard at 7 in the evening. Both times an officer responded. Both times the officer spoke with Foster at the front door and left. The second time Maeve was told she was interfering with a legal guardianship. 3 reports, 3 separate sources, a teacher, a doctor, a neighbor. All 3 going nowhere. Thorne set down the printout and pointed to the form header at the top of the first report. Telfair County Department of Family Services, Senior Coordinator F. Graves. The man they were building a case against was the man the county had routed every warning to. What they didn't know yet, what was sitting in a locked office on Blackwater Road behind a digital keypad, was going to make everything worse. At some point in the middle of the phones and the papers and the low urgent voices in his kitchen, Reaper came back to the couch. The room had become a working space. Renly was watching it all from inside the blanket, still holding the birthday card with both hands. He sat down in the chair across from her, close enough to talk quietly. "That card," he said. "Your mama's," she looked down at it. "My birthday," she said. 3 weeks before. She stopped. Before. He nodded. He didn't fill the silence with anything. "I can't read the top part anymore," she said. "It got wet when I was running for the bus, and I didn't know it would do that. What does the bottom say?" She opened it. "Read it the way you read something you have memorized but still need to say out loud. You are the bravest girl I know." Reaper was quiet. She wasn't wrong. She closed the card. She looked at him. Really looked the way she'd been deciding whether to since the moment he opened the door. "Were you ever scared?" she asked. "Like scared of someone bigger than you?" The question was specific, not about the dark, not about the fog outside. She was asking something that came out of 11 months of particular experience. He thought about how to answer it honestly. "Yeah," he said. "When I was a kid, lived with my uncle after my parents were gone. He was a pause. He was the kind of person who made you feel small on purpose. Like that was the point." She was very still, listening the way children listen when they recognize something. "How did you stop being scared?" she asked. "I didn't for a while," he said. "Then I got old enough to leave, and I found people who had my back." He looked toward the kitchen where Carrick and Thorne and Beckett were working at the table. "That's what brothers are for," he said. She was quiet for a moment, thinking. "What happened to your uncle?" she asked. Then quickly, "You don't have to say." "He's old now," Reaper said. "Unhappy. I don't think about him much." She looked back at the card. "Amber was his other niece," Renly said. "Before me. He talked about her like she wasn't a person, like she was just something that happened to him." Reaper held completely still. "She was 14, Renly said. He said the file says she ran away, but he said it like she searched for the words the way a child searches when they're trying to describe something adult and precise, like when you say something that means something else." Reaper's jaw tightened. A 6-year-old had decoded the subtext of a phone call that a county family court had never questioned. "I'm going to need you to tell Thorne everything you remember about what he said on that call," Reaper said. "Every word in order. Can you do that?" She nodded. "After that, you're going to sleep, not on a cot, in a bed with the door closed and nobody coming in. And when you wake up, this is going to look very different." He put one large hand on top of the backpack she was still holding against herself, not taking it, just resting it there, steady and deliberate, like a handshake between equals. "Those papers stay with me until morning. Nobody touches them until I've read every line. You have my word." She looked at his hand. She looked at his face. "Okay," she said. The first okay had been survival math. This one was something different, something she hadn't given an adult in 11 months. It was trust. Renly sat on the edge of the bed in the small guest room door open the way Reaper had left it and listened to the voices in the kitchen. Low and steady, not angry, not loud, just working. There were 12 people out there now. She'd counted them through the doorway. 12 grown men who had come in the middle of the night because Reaper had called them, because she had knocked on his door. She pulled the blanket around her shoulders. The room smelled like clean laundry and wood. The bed had 2 pillows. The window had curtains she could close if she wanted, but she left them open so she could see the light from the kitchen. She could hear them talking. Not the words, just the sound, the tone. It sounded like the way Daddy used to talk to Mommy in the kitchen after Renly had gone to bed. quiet and serious, and like they were fixing something together. She hadn't heard that sound in 11 months. She lay down. She kept the backpack next to her, even though Reaper had the papers now. The backpack was hers. It was the only thing she'd had control over for 11 months. The only thing Uncle Foster hadn't been able to take. She closed her eyes. For the first time in 11 months, she fell asleep without checking where the door was, without listening for footsteps, without wondering if she'd done something wrong and wouldn't find out until tomorrow. She fell asleep because 12 strangers had shown up in the middle of the night and not one of them had looked at her like she was a problem to be solved. They'd looked at her like she mattered. At 3:47 in the morning, Carrick looked up from his phone with the expression of a man who'd done the arithmetic and arrived somewhere he hadn't expected. "I've got an attorney," he said, "criminal defense and probate. She'll have an emergency injunction drafted before 6. Does she know what she's walking into?" Rapper asked. "I told her it was Foster Graves." A pause. "She said she'd come anyway." There was something in Carrick's voice, a flatness, a precision that told Reaper this attorney was not walking in cold. She knew something, something that hadn't made it into any official report. And with 4 hours and 13 minutes until Foster Graves' attorney arrived at the Telfair County Courthouse, Gideon Vance, the man Foster Graves had never once considered a threat, was about to find out exactly what that was. By 5 in the morning, Lysander had printed 47 pages. He'd been quiet for the better part of an hour. The only sound at the far end of the kitchen table, the low clicking of keys and the occasional pause when something on the screen made him sit back and look at it longer than the lines before it. When he finally gathered the stack and set it in front of Reaper, he did it without a word. The top page was a summary he'd written himself in 7 lines. Under it, estate account withdrawal logs, probate filing dates, and a series of receipts from the Telfair County Department of Family Services administrative budget. Truck purchase, $14,200, Atlanta conference, $3,700. A run of home renovation receipts, a different contractor name on each one, none of them matching any licensed contractor registered in Telfair County, totaling $6,400, $24,300, 11 months, and a trust account balance of $431,700 still waiting on the other side of 9 in the morning. He was careful, Lysander said, but careful people still leave tracks. They just leave them in places they assume nobody will look. Reaper looked at the pages for a long moment. "What do we have that the court will hold up?" Carrick answered from across the table. "The trust instrument is the foundation. He structured the guardianship to give himself administrator status over all financial decisions. That's the mechanism. The withdrawals document abuse of that status. What we need is Renly's testimony on record before 7 and the injunction filed before his attorney walks through the courthouse door." "What else?" the attorney we called Carrick said. "She's been building something on Graves for 8 months. The room went quiet. "She was Amber's attorney," Carrick said. "Pro bono. After the body was found, she tried to contest the accidental drowning ruling." He paused. "The county closed the investigation before she got anywhere." At 5:20 in the morning, Reaper made the second call of the night. The chapter. The full chapter. 31 men woken by their phones before dawn, each given the same 9 words: "Gideon needs you." 624 Blackwater Road. Before sunrise. No explanation. No vote required. That was the agreement that they'd made years ago without ever saying it out loud. If Reaper called before sunrise, you came. He then called Beckett. 2 sentences, 3 neighboring chapters. Tell them what we have. Beckett made 4 calls in the time it took Reaper to read through Lysander's pages a second time, cover to cover. Each call reached a chapter president who knew Reaper personally or knew someone who did, which amounted to the same thing. Word moved through the network the way water moves through old ground. No announcement, no deliberation. It simply traveled. By 6:15 in the morning, the sound started, low and distant like a weather front rolling in from the south. A low, steady rumble that moved up the road in coordinated rows, engine after engine falling into formation, the sound building until it pressed against the windows of every house on Blackwater Road. 147 motorcycles. They parked one by one on the road outside 624 Blackwater Road in a discipline that looked effortless because it had been practiced 1,000 times in 1,000 different situations. No one crossed onto the property. No one shouted. No one stood closer than they needed to. They simply lined the road, engine after engine cutting off until the silence came down like a curtain. 147 bikers standing still in the November dark before sunrise, not moving, not threatening, not speaking, just present. Renly woke to the sound of silence, not the absence of sound, the presence of it, the weight of it, the kind of silence that comes when 147 engines cut off at once and leave something heavier in their place. She sat up in bed. The light from the kitchen was still on. She could hear voices more now layered and low. She got up. She walked to the window, and she saw them. Motorcycles, dozens of them, more than she could count, lined up on both sides of the road like soldiers. And men standing beside them, arms crossed, faces turned toward one house. Uncle Foster's house, her breath caught. "They're here for me," she whispered. She didn't know if that was good or bad. She didn't know if she should be scared, but Reaper had said she was safe. Reaper had said nobody was making her go anywhere. And 12 men had come in the middle of the night just because he'd called. So maybe she thought, maybe this was what it looked like when someone actually helped. She walked back to the bed. She sat down. She pulled the blanket around her shoulders and waited. Because for the first time in 11 months, waiting didn't feel like giving up. It felt like something was finally happening. Foster Graves' bedroom light turned on at 6:23. A neighbor across the road, Maeve Sims, 71 years old, who had spent the better part of a year watching this street fail a 6-year-old girl, stood at her window and watched the road fill up with motorcycles. Later, she would tell a reporter, "I started crying before I even knew why. It was just that there were so many of them, and they were so quiet." The curtain in Foster Graves' bedroom moved. Now you might think this is where it gets ugly. You might be imagining what comes next when 147 bikers surround the house of a man who's been neglecting a child for 11 months. You might be picturing something that looks like a confrontation. That is not what happened. What happened was this. A retired county deputy walked to the front door of 624 Blackwater Road and knocked politely with his hands visible. He was accompanied by Carrick and by an attorney named Vivian Pruitt, 41 years old, sharp-eyed, carrying a briefcase that contained 40 pages of documented financial malfeasance, an emergency custody motion, and 8 months of quietly assembled evidence about a 14-year-old girl who had never gotten the investigation she deserved. She had driven to Hatchfield at 4:30 in the morning, 2 hours after Carrick's call, without being asked twice. Foster Graves opened the door in khakis and a county polo. He had had 40 minutes since the bedroom curtain moved. 40 minutes to compose himself, to pull on the uniform of the reasonable professional, to arrange his face into the expression of a man who found this situation merely inconvenient, who trusted in the strength of properly filed documents and institutional relationships built over a career. He looked at Carrick, he looked at Vivian, he looked at the road behind them, at the wall of men and motorcycles in silence. And for just one moment, one fraction of a second, the professional expression went somewhere it couldn't quite be retrieved from. Then it came back. "Carl," he said, Carrick's given name. Familiar, deliberate. "I have to say we need to speak with you about Renly Calloway's estate," Vivian said. She did not raise her voice. "Specifically, the filing you have scheduled for 9 o'clock this morning. And specifically the question of where Renly is right now." A half-second pause. "Renly is with a family friend," Foster said smoothly. "She's fine. I can get her home. She's been medically assessed," Carrick said. "Mild hypothermia, ear infection consistent with extended cold exposure." The physician documented 11 hours outside in 46-degree weather. Foster's shoulders remained relaxed. His voice remained measured. Look, I understand how this looks. It was a misunderstanding. Renly has had some behavioral challenges since her parents' passing, and sometimes she, Mr. Graves, Vivian said. I represent Renly's interests in the matter of the Callaway Estate Trust. I've filed an emergency injunction with the Telfair County Probate Court at 6:47 this morning. The 9 o'clock filing is suspended pending a full judicial review. Now the shoulders moved, just slightly, barely visible. On what grounds? On the grounds of potential conflict of interest, undisclosed financial transactions, and newly surfaced concerns related to a prior guardianship. The name wasn't said yet. It didn't need to be. But Foster heard it anyway. It was in the specificity, prior guardianship. That was the tell. He heard it and something shifted behind his eyes, a recalculation, fast and cold. And his next response came out 3 syllables too smooth. I'm going to need to contact my attorney. Of course, Vivian said. We'll wait. And from the window of Reaper's guest room, Renly watched. She couldn't hear the words, but she could see Uncle Foster standing on the porch. She could see the way he held his hands, the way his shoulders moved. She'd spent 11 months learning to read him, learning when he was angry, when he was pretending, when he was about to do something that would hurt. And right now, standing on that porch with 147 motorcycles lined up behind the people talking to him, Uncle Foster looked like something she'd never seen before. He looked scared. She pressed her hand against the window. He's finally scared, she whispered. And for the first time in 11 months, Renly Callaway smiled. What followed was witnessed by 4 people in addition to Carrick and Vivian. 3 of them would later give formal statements. Here is what they saw. Maeve Sims had been watching this street for 30 years. She walked across the road at 6:48 in the morning. She introduced herself to Thorne, who had been expecting her. He'd had her name from the county records and had crossed the yard to meet her before she reached the sidewalk so she wouldn't have to push through a wall of strangers to get to someone who would listen. They sat on her front steps. The sun wasn't fully up yet. The motorcycles lined both sides of Blackwater Road behind them, engines silent. Thorne had his notebook open. He didn't start with questions. He just said, "Tell me what you saw. Start wherever feels right." Maeve's hands were in her lap. She looked at Foster Graves's front door for a moment. The closed windows, the drawn curtains, the pressed khaki tidiness of a house that had always looked exactly right from the outside. And then she looked down. The first time I called, she said, was about 6 months after he took her in. I heard shouting from inside the house, not an argument. One voice, his, going on for about 10 minutes, then just stopping. I didn't hear Renly at all. That's what scared me. When you hear one person that angry and nothing from the other person, that's not a fight. That's something else. What did the responding officer say? Thorne asked. He knocked on Foster's door. Foster came out, shook his hand, calm, professional. He's good at that. The officer came back to me and said Mr. Graves had explained it was a difficult night, that Renly was grieving her parents and had had a behavioral episode. He said, and I'm quoting exactly, children in foster situations can present real challenges, ma'am. Mr. Graves is a trained professional. He knows how to handle it. She paused. Trained professional, she said again, quietly, like she was still deciding what to do with those words. The second time Thorne asked, 7 in the evening, a Tuesday. I saw Renly in the backyard alone. No coat. This was early October, maybe 50 degrees, just sitting in the grass near the fence. I watched for a while thinking Foster would come out. Nobody came. I called the non-emergency line. Same officer. Different one, but same result. He spoke to Foster at the front door. Didn't ask to see Renly, came back and told me she was fine and had chosen to play outside. Maeve's jaw tightened. She was 6 years old in October, alone in a backyard at 7 o'clock at night. That's not choosing to play outside. That's being put outside. She stopped. Her hands had started shaking. The second officer told me I was interfering with illegal guardianship. He said that if I continued filing non-emergency reports without evidence of immediate danger, there could be consequences for me. She looked at Thorne directly. So I went inside. I told myself Foster was a county man. He knew what he was doing. Who was I to question it? I told myself that every week for 9 months. A pause. I never believed it, not for a single week. Thorne wrote for a long moment. Then he looked up. Maeve, the 2 calls you made, they're documented. The responses are documented. What you just described is a responding officer accepting the word of the subject of the complaint without speaking to the child. That goes in the report. The system failed you as much as it failed Renly. You tried the mechanism and the mechanism was broken. She pressed her lips together. I could have tried harder, she said. You tried what you had, Thorne said, and you're here now. Your testimony establishes 9 months of documented concern, 2 separate police contacts, an institutional closure without a single officer requesting to see the child. That matters for the case. She nodded. She was looking at the motorcycles now, at the wall of men standing quietly in the early morning. The scale of what had assembled on this ordinary road. Is she all right? Maeve asked. She's warm, Thorne said. She had hot cocoa this morning. She slept in a bed. Maeve pressed her lips together very hard. Good, she said, the word barely audible. Then she straightened, wiped her eyes with the back of one hand. Tell me what you need from me, she said. Written statement, court testimony, whatever it takes. I've been sitting on that porch for 9 months watching that house. I'm done watching. Dale Whitaker showed up at 7:15. He drove his personal car, not the mail truck, and parked at the end of the road. He'd heard the engines at 6:30 through his bedroom window and spent 45 minutes sitting on the edge of the bed before getting up and driving toward them without fully deciding to. He found Thorne. He said I drove past her on Wednesday morning, sitting on the steps. I saw her and I kept going. His voice had the quality of a man who had been carrying something heavy since yesterday and was setting it down whether anyone wanted him to or not. Thorne had been waiting for exactly this. How long have you had that route, he asked. 22 years. And in 22 years, have you ever seen a child in pajamas sitting alone on a front porch at 9 o'clock in the morning? No. So you knew something was off. Yes. You kept driving? Yes. Silence. I know that's not Dale started. It's not, Thorne said evenly. And you know it. What you can do now is say exactly what you just told me to the people who are going to need to hear it. You saw her. You can confirm she was alone. You can confirm the time. That becomes part of the record. Dale nodded. He looked at his hands. Will it matter? It already does. Thorne said, You're here, aren't you? Inside Reaper's house, Renly sat at the kitchen table with a second cup of cocoa. Not too sweet this time. Beckett had made it and he'd asked her how sweet she wanted it, and she'd said just a little and he'd listened. That was new, an adult asking what she wanted and then doing it. Carrick sat down across from her. He had kind eyes, tired but kind, the kind of tired that came from seeing too much, not from not caring. Renly, he said, I need to ask you about the phone call you heard, the one about Amber. Can you tell me what you remember? She nodded. She'd been ready for this. She'd practiced it in her head while she was lying in bed listening to the voices in the kitchen. It was Tuesday night, she said. 2 nights ago, I was in the laundry room. That's where Uncle Foster makes me sleep sometimes when he says I've been difficult. Carrick wrote that down. He didn't react. He just wrote it. The walls are thin, Renly continued. I could hear him talking on the phone in his office. He didn't know I was awake. What did he say? Carrick asked. He said Amber ran away. That's what the file says. Just like this one will say. She stopped, looked at Carrick. I didn't know who Amber was then, but I knew this one meant me, and I knew ran away sounded bad when he said it like that. Like it wasn't true. What else did you hear? He said she asked too many questions about the money. He said the file says she ran away and that's all it says. He said this one's smarter. Need to be careful. Carrick stopped writing. He looked at Renly for a long moment. You understood what he meant. Not all of it, Renly said, but I understood he was talking about me and another girl. And I understood that what happened to her was bad. And I understood that he was going to make people think I ran away too if I asked questions. She looked down at her hands. That's when I knew I had to keep the papers. Because if I had the papers, he needed me. And if he needed me, maybe he wouldn't make me run away like Amber. The room was very quiet. Carrick closed his notebook. Renly, he said, you may have just saved your own life. She looked up at him. He smiled. It was a sad smile, but it was real. And you're going to help us make sure no one else has to do what you did. Outside, the sun was coming up. The light touched the edges of the motorcycles first, then the men standing beside them, then the windows of the house at 624 Blackwater Road. Foster Graves came back to the door at 7:22. His attorney, not the probate attorney, a different one, had advised him by phone to cooperate with the inquiry and say nothing that acknowledged the documents as legitimate. The tone of Foster's face when he opened the door was the most dangerous version of calm, the kind that means strategies have been deployed and someone is waiting to see which one works. He looked at Carrick. He opened his hands, palms up, reasonable, professional. Carly, I want to be helpful here. I genuinely do. I understand there are concerns about Renly's well-being, and I share them. I've been her primary caregiver for 11 months. I think about nothing else. But this a gesture at the road. This is not the right process. Whatever questions exist about the trust, those are matters for the court. Carrick looked at him. The court has those questions, he said, as of 6:47 this morning. A beat. I've also been asked to invite your attention to several withdrawals from the estate management account over the past 11 months. He set Lysander's printout on the porch railing between them. Specific amounts, specific dates. Foster's eyes moved to the pages for exactly 2 seconds before they came back up. 2 seconds was long enough. His posture had not changed, but his eyes had done something very small and very telling. They'd moved to the pages, then past them, then back to Carrick's face. That middle movement past the pages was the reflex of a man who just calculated whether the pages showed what he thought they showed. They did. The charm held for another 90 seconds. He name-dropped the county administrator. He mentioned 30 years of family services work and what it meant to the community. He noted with what appeared to be genuine bewilderment that the men behind Carrick seemed to have misunderstood something. Then Vivian said one sentence. Mr. Graves, we also want to discuss Amber Ann Graves. The charm didn't slip. It fell. Not all the way. He caught it. But for one clear second, something on the other side of that face was visible. Something that wasn't professionalism or bewilderment or community-minded patience. He caught it, straightened, recalculated. My niece's death was a tragedy, he said. The investigation was thorough. The investigation was closed without reviewing the medical examiner's note about perimortem wrist markings, Vivian said. My client Amber's file documents that you don't have standing to. I have a client, Vivian said, and she's 6 years old, and she's currently with a physician who has documented the physical effects of 11 months of your guardianship. She paused. I would like to invite you to step outside and speak with us about how this morning proceeds. That is my only offer. He stepped outside at 7:31. He stood on his front porch with 147 men lining his road in silence and made the decision that the best strategy remaining was sympathy. I want to be honest with you, he said. His voice had gone quieter, less formal. The shift was practiced, a lower register, an appeal to something human. I've been struggling since the accident. They were family to me too. Martin, Nell. I took Renly in because there was nobody else. And a pause that was calibrated to look like difficulty. I know I've made mistakes. Grief does that. I wasn't prepared. Carrick let him finish. Then he said, we have Renly's statement on record from this morning, including what she heard on Tuesday night. Silence. We also have a federal flag on Amber's case, Carrick said. It went up at 6:52. Foster's hands, which had been open and readable at his sides, closed. You're welcome to call your attorney, Carrick said. The FBI is going to want to speak with them anyway. The word FBI landed differently than any of the others. It landed the way a name lands when you hear it and understand for the first time the actual size of the thing you're standing in. Silence. I don't have anything to say, Foster said. That's your right, Carrick said. But she's going to have a lot to say, and her words are going to matter more than yours. One more second. One complete unperformed second in which Foster Graves stood on his porch in his county polo, in his pressed khakis, and understood that the structure he had built over 11 months, over 3 years, if you counted Amber, had been taken apart in the time it took a 6-year-old to walk 3 blocks in the dark. His hands were clenched at his sides. I was careful, he said quietly. To no one in particular, I was so careful. The mask was gone. Not rage, not grief, just what sits underneath a life of performance when the performance finally has nowhere to go. Renly watched from the window. She saw Uncle Foster's hands close, saw his shoulders drop, saw something in the way he stood that she'd never seen before. He looked small. For 11 months, he had been the biggest thing in her world, the one who decided if she ate, if she slept inside, if the door stayed locked, the one whose voice through the wall could make her pull the blanket over her head and try not to exist. And now, standing on that porch, surrounded by men who had come because a 6-year-old knocked on a door, he looked small. She pressed her hand against the glass. Reaper came up behind her. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, one hand resting on the back of the chair beside her. "Is it over?" she asked. "Not yet," Reaper said. "But it's going to be." She looked up at him. "What happens to me?" "You go somewhere safe," he said, "with someone who's going to actually take care of you. And you get to be a kid again." Renly looked back out the window. "I don't remember how to do that," she said quietly. Reaper crouched down beside her chair. So they were at the same height. "Then we'll figure it out together," he said. 2 Telfair County Sheriff's cruisers arrived at 7:44. They pulled up behind the motorcycles. The officers walked to the front door, past 147 men who moved aside without being asked because they had already done everything that needed doing, and the next part was not theirs. The arrest was made at 7:51. Miranda writes read at the door. Foster Graves, hands behind his back, being walked past the windows of his own neighborhood, past the trucks and the mail routes and the PTA meetings and the Habitat for Humanity builds, past every surface presentation of a man who had devoted himself to the protection of vulnerable children. As they put him in the cruiser, he asked quietly if someone could call his neighbor about his cat. Not the child he'd locked outside, not the girl in the river. His cat. Thorne heard it. He didn't respond. The charges filed by 8:30 in the morning. Felony fraud, exploitation of a guardian administrator position, felony child endangerment, physical neglect and willful deprivation of food shelter and medical care to a minor, grand theft, misappropriation of a minor's trust, assets totaling $24,300, abuse of office, use of a county employee position to interfere with mandatory reporting investigations, and a 5th charge still being reviewed by the district attorney's office, interference with an investigation related to a minor's death. Amber's name was on paper now, in an official document, with the word investigation beside it, for the first time in 3 years. Bail was set at $310,000. His personal accounts held $58,700. He did not make bail. The probate filing never reached the courthouse. The emergency injunction held at 9:02 in the morning, 2 minutes past the deadline that had defined the entire night. Vivian Pruitt stood in the Telfair County Probate Court and officially contested the transfer of the Calloway estate on behalf of its beneficiary, Renly Claire Calloway, age 6.5. Justice had been served. But justice wasn't the ending, it was only the beginning. Lysander found it at 8:14 in the morning, not in the estate documents, not in the withdrawal logs he'd already printed, in the county database. a backdoor into the family services filing system that a man with his background could walk through in under 40 minutes if he had the right reference keys. He found a folder. F. Graves, Administrative Access Log, 17 cases, 11 in the past 4 years. He read the first 3 entries, and then he set the laptop down and said Reaper's name. Just his name. Nothing else. They thought the worst was over. They were wrong, because the worst wasn't one man. The worst was what that one man led to. By 9:15, Thorne and Lysander and Carrick were at the clubhouse table. Not Reaper's kitchen, not the road on Blackwater, the room where they made decisions with the door closed and the phones on the table, and the kind of stillness that comes over a group of men who have stopped reacting and started thinking. Lysander opened the laptop. He had administrator access to 17 active foster care files, he said. 4 of those files, 4 families have Graves listed as a professional reference for guardianship placement, which means he vouched for the placements, which means if any of those placements went wrong, the person who reported the problem would file with his department. And the person who reviewed it, Carrick said, would be a colleague with reason to cover. Silence. Lysander scrolled down. Layer 2, he said. Financial pattern. 3 of the 4 placement families have drawn from minor trust accounts within 12 months of guardianship. 2 of those draws were processed through a subsidiary account managed by an estate planning firm in Valdosta. He turned the laptop. The name on the screen, Whitlock and Associates, attorney at law, estate planning and probate administration. Telfair, Berrien, and Coffee counties. Carrick recognized it. Sterling Whitlock filed Foster's emergency guardianship petition 11 days after the accident, he said. Fastest emergency filing I've ever seen. Usually takes 3 to 4 weeks for the court to... He had it drafted before the accident, Lysander said. The room went very quiet. That's not possible, Thorne said. Unless the accident wasn't the trigger, Lysander said. Unless he was already watching the estate, already had the motion language ready, already knew what it would take. He turned the laptop back and pointed to a metadata timestamp at the bottom of the filing document. The petition had been created 12 days before Martin and Nell Calloway died. The refrigerator hummed, the morning light came through the window, and every man in that room understood they were not just trying to stop an 11-month scheme. They were looking at something that had been running for years, that had already taken one life and walked away clean, and that had 17 current files open and active in Telfair County's family services system right now. He had a partner, Reaper said. Nobody disputed it, and we know exactly where Whitlock's office is, Carrick said. Sterling Whitlock's office was on the 2nd floor of a building on Hatchfield's Main Street. Tan carpet, framed degrees on the wall, a waiting room with landscape photography, and a receptionist who told Reaper that Mr. Whitlock wasn't taking appointments that morning. Reaper sat down in the waiting room chair and said he'd wait. Carrick stood by the door. Whitlock came out in 11 minutes. He was 62, gray-suited, with the expression of a man who understood from the moment he saw Reaper's vest that the reasonable thing to do was cooperate. They went to his office. Reaper set Lysander's printed pages on the desk. Tell me everything, he said, from the beginning. Whitlock looked at the pages. He looked at Reaper. He looked at Carrick. His hands were on his knees. They weren't shaking yet. They would be by the end. I want you to understand, he started that my involvement was... I don't want to understand, Reaper said. I want the facts. Whitlock looked at his hands. He broke in under 3 minutes. The arrangement had started 6 years ago. Graves would identify orphan children with estate holdings. He had access to every probate filing in the county through his position. Whitlock would fast-track guardianship placements and trust administrator appointments. Between them, the withdrawal stayed small enough to avoid automatic audit flags. Multiple families, multiple accounts. The same structure repeated with slight variations. How many, Reaper said, counting Renly. A long pause. 7 confirmed cases, Whitlock said, where money changed hands. 3 of those, the children, are still in placement. 4 have aged out or been, he stopped, removed. Removed, Reaper said. Transferred to state facilities. Reaper looked at him for a long time, and Amber Graves' Whitlock's hands had started shaking. That was not part of our arrangement, he said. What happened to Amber? That was Foster's decision. That was not, he stopped again, reorganized. I knew she'd been asking questions about the trust. Foster told me she was becoming a problem. I did not know what he intended, but you didn't ask. A pause. No, Whitlock said. I didn't ask. Reaper stood. That was the part that made his chest heavy. Not Graves. Graves was comprehensible. A predator. Specific. Calculated. Whitlock was something harder to hold. A man who had seen what was coming and chosen not to look directly at it. Who had filed the papers and deposited his portion and never once said stop. Who could have prevented Amber? Who chose instead to not ask? You're going to repeat everything you just told me to a federal agent, Reaper said. Or you're going to spend the rest of your professional life explaining how a 14-year-old drowned 70 miles from the house you helped put her in. Whitlock nodded. Once. Small. I want immunity, he said. That's between you and the federal government, Reaper said. I'm not interested in your deal. I'm interested in the 3 kids who are still in placement. He walked to the door. He stopped without turning around. Name them, he said. All 3. Now, Whitlock named them. The FBI field agent's name was Corcoran. Agent Dana Corcoran. Atlanta field office. 44 years old. Plain clothes. A jacket that had been through too many parking lots in too many county towns to look like anything other than what it was. An agent who spent more time driving than sitting at a desk. She met Reaper in the parking lot at 10:20. Her handshake was brief and practical. You have something relevant to an open federal investigation, she said. Depends on what you're investigating, Reaper said. Foster Graves, she said, in the county placement network. He looked at Carrick. The decision was made in the space between 2 breaths. They went inside. At the table, Reaper set down the documents one at a time. The trust instrument, the withdrawal logs, the administrative access folder, the Whitlock transcript recorded on Carrick's phone with Whitlock's knowledge and verbal consent delivered at the end of 11 minutes of shaking hands and careful sentences. Agent Corcoran stopped writing once, removed her glasses, leaned forward. When Lysander's financial cross-reference came out, the 3 children still in placement, named with file numbers. She looked at it for 30 seconds without moving. This fills a gap we haven't been able to close, she said. How long has your office had Graves on radar? Reaper asked. A pause. 6 months. He let that sit in the air. He didn't say Renly has been in that house for 11 months. He didn't say 6 months ago your office had the flag and a 6-year-old was still sleeping on a laundry room cot. He said nothing. He let the arithmetic do it for him. Agent Corcoran was experienced enough to hear it anyway. We got her out, Reaper said quietly, in one night, with 7 hours and no warrant. The silence in the room was the kind that doesn't need a verdict. My condition, Reaper said. Renly gets a victim advocate assigned before anyone from your office talks to her. Nobody asked her questions she didn't choose to answer. And the 3 children Whitlock named, I want confirmation of their welfare before end of day. Corcoran studied him. We'll be in touch, she said. Agent Corcoran, she turned. Do right by her, Reaper said. That's the job. A beat. That's the job, she agreed. At noon, the full scope was assembled. 7 victims confirmed, 4 aged out or transferred, 3 still in active placement, all 3 located by 11:45. Welfare checks initiated through the Georgia Division of Family and Children's Services by federal request. Total assets documented as misappropriated across all 7 cases. $387,400, specific, verified, every dollar tied to a date and account of signature. Timeline, 6 years of operation. The first case opened 43 months before Amber Graves disappeared. Charges added through the federal investigation. Felony exploitation of a protected person. wire fraud, estate accounts routed through a registered professional intermediary, conspiracy to commit probate fraud across 3 Georgia counties, and a charge that Agent Corcoran's office filed separately quietly through the district attorney's office in Berrien County, the county where Amber's body had been found. Obstruction of investigation into the death of a minor. 7 victims, $387,400, 6 years. And for 6 years, a system built specifically to catch exactly this kind of abuse had looked the other way. Because the man running the abuse was the man the system called when something looked wrong. Amber Graves never got a Reaper. That's not a story, that's a statistic. And the difference between Renly and Amber was 3 blocks and 1 Amber porch light in the dark. The system hadn't been broken. A broken system could be fixed. This one worked exactly as designed, built to move slowly, to protect procedure, to root concerns through the channels of the very institutions being misused. The brothers hadn't replaced the system. They'd bought the time the system needed to function, and they'd done it in less than 10 hours. Justice had been served. But justice wasn't the ending. It was only the beginning. Dr. Hollis Strand had kept the chart. 11 months, every missed appointment documented, every flag metric unreturned. She had kept the chart the way certain professionals keep things they know they may one day need to hand to someone who will actually use them. Not with optimism exactly, but with the specific quiet discipline of a person who refuses to let the record disappear. When Beckett called her at 8 in the morning, she said, "I've been waiting for this call." She met them at the Hatchfield Family Health Clinic at 9:30. She had already pulled Renly's file. She did not ask how the morning had unfolded. She simply opened the door, brought them to an exam room, and did her job with the thoroughness of someone who understood that every measurement she took now was also a measurement of how long the system had failed to intervene. Renly sat on the exam table in a paper gown, swinging her feet, watching Dr. Strand with the cautious attention of a child who has learned to be careful in medical settings. Because the last several appointments had been the last several times her uncle had pretended to care. Beckett sat in the corner chair. He'd brought a granola bar, the kind with chocolate chips. Not the kind that's pretending to be healthy. He set it on the table beside her without making an announcement about it. She ate it during the exam without being told she could. Dr. Strand worked through the assessment. Ear temperature 100.4 degrees Fahrenheit. An infection building for days untreated. Weight 37 pounds. Confirmed 11 pounds below the median for her age and height. She documented the bruise on the right knee. Yellow-gray, approximately 2 weeks old, never cleaned or bandaged. The scabs along both shins in a pattern distribution that spoke of repeated falls without adult intervention. Fingernails bitten to the quick on both hands. A stressed behavior Dr. Strand noted for the record that Renly's kindergarten teacher had first flagged 8 months ago. "How long since your ear started hurting?" Dr. Strand asked. Renly thought about it. "A while," she said. "Maybe the cold." Probably the cold, Dr. Strand had agreed in the tone of someone who is furious on the inside and careful on the outside. "We're going to fix that today." She looked at Beckett over Renly's head. One long look. He returned it. She turned back to her chart and wrote for a measured, deliberate moment. "Thank you," she said to no one in particular, "for getting her here when you did." Back at Reaper's house, Renly ate breakfast at 11:15 in the morning. Real breakfast, eggs and toast and orange juice, and a second piece of toast because Beckett had made extra without asking, and no one was watching the clock, and there was no consequence attached to wanting more. She ate without watching the door. She ate without hurrying. She ate without putting anything in her pocket. That last one took Reaper a moment to process. The absence of the behavior, the way her hands stayed on the table instead of going to her jacket the way they had 3 times at the clinic. He noticed it and didn't say anything. Some things you don't name, you just watch them happen and let them be what they are. The smell of motor oil still drifted faintly from the garage through the cracked kitchen window. The same smell that had guided her down the driveway 12 hours ago in the dark and the ground fog. The same smell that had made her stand very still for a moment because it reminded her of before. Now she sat in the kitchen where that smell originated, and she was eating toast and Titan was asleep under her chair, and the morning light came through the curtains at a low November angle. The amber porch light was off. It was daytime. It didn't need to be on anymore. The housing question was answered by noon. It came from Maeve Sims, who had walked back across Blackwater Road after giving her statement, gone inside, and made a phone call of her own to her sister Beth, who owned a rental house on Cedar Mill Lane, 6/10 of a mile from Hatchfield Elementary School that had been sitting empty since September. She called Carrick at 11:40. "Tell me what Renly needs," she said, "and I'll tell you what we can offer." What Renly needed legally was an emergency foster placement, while Vivian worked the custody motion. What she needed practically was a house with a bedroom that had a window and a door that locked from the inside, and an adult who had 30 years of experience spotting when a child wasn't okay and the backbone to say so to the right people. Maeve Sims fit that description in every particular. The chapter covered the first 6 months of rent. $6,400 raised in a single call to the chapter treasurer collected by that evening. Vivian fast-tracked the emergency foster licensing through the state office using a provision that allowed expedited review for kinship-adjacent placements in documented child welfare emergencies. The licensing came through in 4 days. On the 5th day, Renly stood in the doorway of the bedroom on Cedar Mill Lane. It had a window that looked out onto the yard, a bed with 2 blankets, a dresser with actual drawers. Maeve handed her a key, her own key, with a small wooden keychain carved in the shape of a sun. "That's yours," Maeve said. "Not mine to hold, not your uncle's. Yours." Renly held it in both hands for a long moment. Then she put it in the pocket of her jacket, the same pocket that used to hold food she was saving for later. Now it held something else. The brothers said goodbye the way brothers do, without ceremony, without speeches, in the specific language of men who express things through action because words were always secondary. Lysander came to the clinic during the afternoon visit. He brought his laptop, ostensibly to check on the federal filing status, but also a small external speaker, and he let Renly pick what to play while they waited. She picked something with piano. He showed her how the equalizer worked. She spent 12 minutes adjusting bass levels with intense concentration. When he left, he wrote his number on a post-it note and stuck it to the front of the speaker. Anytime he said, "I mean it, you can call if something breaks or if you just want to talk about music." Either one. She looked at the post-it note. She looked at him. "Okay," she said. Boone came by Maeve's house on the second evening. He didn't knock. He stood on the front walk, looked at the house for a moment, nodded once as though confirming something to himself, and left. Maeve, watching from the kitchen window later, told Thorne she didn't know who he was, but she found his presence deeply comforting, which was the effect Boone had been having on people for 30 years without ever trying. Beckett left a medical follow-up schedule with Dr. Strand, specific dates, specific appointments, with his phone number at the bottom. "Call me if anything is missed," he said. He did not mean it as a threat. He meant it as exactly what it said. Thorne sat with Renly for 40 minutes on the 3rd day. They didn't talk about Foster. They talked about school, about whether she liked math or reading better, about what she was going to ask Maeve to make for dinner, about the birthday card which Thorne had delivered to a print shop the day before, laminated, framed in oak, preserved exactly as it was, blur at the top and all. He handed it to her across the table. She looked at it for a long time. "You were the bravest girl I know," she read. She set it on the table. She smoothed the frame with both thumbs. "She was right," Thorne said. "You know that." Renly considered it with the serious deliberation of a 6-and-a-half-year-old reviewing evidence. "I didn't feel brave," she said. "I was scared the whole time." "Yeah," Thorne said. "That's what brave is." The legal picture came into focus over the following 3 weeks. Foster Graves remained in Telfair County detention, held without bail, After a second bail hearing at which Vivian Pruitt presented the federal charge timeline and argued successfully that the pattern of behavior across 6 years and 7 victims constituted a meaningful flight risk. His probate attorney withdrew from representation. His county employment was terminated by emergency board vote on day 2. The Telfair County Department of Family Services initiated an internal review. Not the kind that routes through a department head, but an external audit mandated by the state office with a designated investigator who reported to the governor's office, not to anyone in Hatchfield. The audit found what Lysander had found, and then it found more. Sterling Whitlock accepted a cooperation agreement. He provided sworn testimony in exchange for reduced charges, naming 4 additional cases outside Telfair County. 2 of those cases produced criminal referrals. 1 produced a second arrest. Amber Ann Graves' death was officially reclassified from accidental drowning to death under suspicious circumstances, with an active criminal investigation opened in Berrien County. The medical examiner who had noted the perimortem ligature markings and never been called to testify gave a statement within the week. She had kept her notes. The Calloway estate was placed under independent court administration. $431,700 preserved for Renly Claire Calloway. Accessible when she turned 18 or under, Vivian's petition, partially accessible for verified educational and medical needs before that. The birthday card hung on the wall in her room on Cedar Mill Lane. Framed oak border, laminated against water and time, and anything else that might try to take it. The bottom line's still clear. You are the bravest girl I know. But this story isn't really about a trust document or a probate deadline. It's about what happens in the space between a door being locked and a door being open. What fills that space, and whether anything is left of a child when someone finally answers. 3 weeks after that Thursday morning, Reaper drove past Cedar Mill Lane. He hadn't planned to. He was on his way back from the parts supplier on Route 19, and the road was quiet, and he took the turn without deciding to in any deliberate sense. The lights were on in the house, warm yellow through the curtains, Maeve's sedan in the driveway, a second light lower in what he knew was Renly's room. He pulled over at the corner. Through the curtain a shape, small, moving. A child walking back and forth in her room the way children do when they're thinking or when they're practicing something or when they simply have enough space to move freely and they finally remember that their body can do that. He didn't know which it was. He watched for 30 seconds. She wasn't watching the door. She wasn't checking the exit. She was just moving. He sat with what that meant for longer than he expected to. Not pride, not the clean feeling you might expect from seeing something work out. The specific weight that lives alongside relief. The understanding that 3 weeks ago she had been outside in the dark for 11 hours, and that no amount of good outcome entirely undoes that. That the thing she'd lost in 11 months couldn't be restored, only worked around. Brick by brick, week by week, by Maeve's presence and Dr. Strand's chart, and a key on a wooden keychain carved in the shape of a sun. He started the truck. He didn't look back, but he carried it with him the way he carried everything from those nights. Not as a burden, as ballast. The weight that keeps you steady when the next call comes. And there would be a next call. There always was. 8 months later, Renly Calloway made honor roll. Hatchfield Elementary, first grade, Mrs. Glendon's class. The same Mrs. Glendon who had filed the welfare report 11 months ago and never heard back from anyone. Who had documented 31 observations in a notebook she kept in her desk because the system hadn't given her anywhere official to put them. The report card came home on a Tuesday. Maeve framed it next to the birthday card. Renly had decided somewhere around month 6 that she liked reading better than math, but that she was secretly better at math than she was at reading, which she found interesting and somewhat irritating. She told Maeve about this with the careful analytical tone of a child processing a contradiction. Maeve told her that was called self-awareness, and it would serve her well. She had one friend and then 2, and then a small, reliable cluster who saved her a seat at lunch. She still ate quickly. She was working on not doing that. She had not forgotten what happened. She was not expected to, but she had started counting different days. The days since she'd started at Cedar Mill Lane, the days since her ear had stopped hurting, the days since she had slept all the way through without waking to check if the door was still open. Carrick stopped by in October with a casserole dish from his wife and the information that Foster Graves's trial date had been set for January, that Whitlock's cooperation testimony had added 3 additional counts, that the Berrien County investigation into Amber's death was progressing slowly with the caution of a case being rebuilt from scratch, but progressing. He left the casserole on the porch. He didn't come inside. Some things you deliver and then step back from because the space belongs to the people living in it. The Telfair County Foster Care Oversight Protocol was revised that same month. An external review mandate requiring any welfare report naming a county employee to be routed automatically to the state office. No local review authority. No self-referral loop. 7 families had been in the old system. Their cases were being re-examined. 3 were fully resolved. 2 had resulted in additional interventions. 2 were still in process. The protocol change was named informally by the state office, not officially the Callaway Review. The people who worked in county family services knew what it meant. They knew what had made it necessary. That was the point. 6 years later, Renly Callaway was 12. She had Nell's eyes and Martin's stubbornness and a reading speed that alarmed her teachers in the best possible way. She lived on Cedar Mill Lane. Maeve was 77. They had an arrangement that had stopped requiring a legal framework and simply become what it was. A family assembled from available materials, sturdy in the way things are sturdy when they have been tested and held. She was in the library on a Thursday afternoon when she saw the girl. 11, maybe 12, sitting in the corner chair behind the oversized picture books, where you could be technically in public while being invisible, wearing a jacket that was a size too small, school bag on her lap, both hands on the straps. Renly recognized the posture before she recognized the expression. She'd worn it for long enough to know it from the inside. That specific combination of exhaustion and weariness, and the very thin remaining thread of something that hadn't given up yet. She crossed the room. She didn't make a speech. She didn't ask questions the girl wasn't ready to answer. She sat down in the chair beside her and said, "I'm Renly. You can stay here as long as you want. Nobody's going to make you move." The girl looked at her, calculating, deciding. "My name's Harlow," she said. "Okay, Harlow," Renly said. "Do you want me to get you something from the vending machine?" A pause. "I don't have money," Harlow said. "I know," Renly said. "I have some." She got up. She got 2 things from the vending machine. She came back and set one in front of Harlow without making it a transaction. Then she pulled out her phone. The one Lysander had helped her choose 2 birthdays ago, practical and durable. And she found the number she needed. Not Reaper. Reaper was for later if later was necessary. She called Maeve first. "Hey," she said. "I'm at the library. I need your help with something." 6 years before someone had opened a door. Now she was the one who knew how. Maeve arrived in 14 minutes. She came through the library doors with the focused calm of someone who had done this before, who understood what a child sitting in a corner with a bag on her lap actually meant. She sat down on the other side of Harlow. Not too close. Giving space. "Hi, sweetheart," Maeve said. "I'm Maeve. Renly called me. Is it okay if I sit here with you for a bit?" Harlow looked at Renly, then at Maeve, then back at Renly. "She's safe," Renly said quietly. "I promise." Harlow's hands tightened on the bag straps. "My mom's boyfriend," she started, then stopped. "You don't have to tell us right now," Maeve said. "But when you're ready, we're going to listen, and we're going to help." "Okay." Harlow nodded. Once. Small. Maeve pulled out her phone. She made 2 calls, one to Vivian Pruitt, one to Carrick. Each call lasted under 2 minutes. When she hung up, she looked at Harlow. "We're going to take you somewhere safe tonight," she said. "And tomorrow we're going to figure out what comes next. But right now, you don't have to be scared anymore." Harlow looked at her hands. "How do you know?" she asked. How do you know it's going to be okay? Maeve glanced at Renly. Because 6 years ago, Maeve said a little girl knocked on a stranger's door in the middle of the night. And that stranger called some people, and those people didn't stop until she was safe. And now that little girl's sitting right here, and she's the one who found you. Harlow looked at Renly. Renly nodded. It's true, she said. And I know it's hard to believe right now, but you're going to be okay. I know because I was you. The carburetor on the workbench was different. Different model, different year, different bike, but the same workbench. The same coffee going cold beside the same shop rag. The same amber garage light holding the same piece of Georgia Road in a circle of yellow and gold. Reaper had been out here since 10. Some nights were still like that. His phone was on the workbench beside the coffee. He picked it up not because it had buzzed, it hadn't, but because he'd been thinking about something Renly had asked him once. 8 months after that night, she'd asked, do you remember all of them? He'd said, yeah. She'd said, does it help? He'd thought about it honestly before answering. Helps me know what I'm doing it for, he'd said. He opened his photos now, the folder he'd labeled without overthinking it. Reasons. It was full of things people had sent him. Not the chapter, not the network, but strangers. A woman in Valdosta whose nephew had been found. A family in Macon who'd gotten their grandmother out of a situation before the paperwork went through. A teacher in Lee County who'd sent a photo of a classroom she'd been able to go back to. And one photo from Maeve taken 4 months ago. Unremarkable except for what it showed. Renly at the kitchen table on Cedar Mill Lane doing homework. The framed birthday card visible on the wall behind her. The lamplight warm, the door to the hallway open. He set the phone down. He picked up his shop rag. He went back to the carburetor. He was made of the same material as the damage he'd survived. That was the thing he'd slowly understood over years of nights like this one. The same stubbornness, the same refusal to accept that this was just the shape of things. He couldn't undo what had happened to him at 9 years old, or at 12, or at 15. He couldn't undo what had happened to Renly, or to Amber, or to the children whose names he carried without knowing their faces. But he could be the light someone walked toward in the dark. He could make sure that when someone knocked 3 small taps, not a fist, the door opened. That was the job. That had always been the job. And he didn't need a badge for it, or a commission, or the approval of a county department. He just needed to be awake when the knock came. He always would be. This story is about something underneath the surface, underneath the trust documents, in the probate deadlines, in the federal charges. It's about what a child does when every adult in her world has failed her and she has to decide one more time with whatever she has left whether to try again. If you have ever been that child, if you have ever stood at the edge of a porch light in the dark and wondered whether the door would open, this story is for you. The answer was always yes. It just sometimes took longer than it should have. If there is a child in your life right now who holds their backpack like a shield, who eats too quickly and saves food in their pockets, who watches hands before faces, who has stopped asking for help because asking didn't work the last time, pay attention. Say something. Don't be the person who keeps driving because you figured they were just playing. You don't need a vest to be the person who opens the door. The last thing Renly Calloway did before she walked into Maeve's kitchen on the first night was look back at the road. The amber porch light was behind her now, warm, steady, still on. She went inside. 6 months later, Renly stood in a courtroom, not as a witness, not as a victim, as an observer. The sentencing hearing for Foster Aldrich Graves. Maeve sat beside her. Vivian sat 2 rows ahead. Carrick stood near the back wall, arms crossed, watching. The judge spoke for 11 minutes, outlined the charges, the evidence, the scope of damage across 7 children in 6 years, 25 years, the judge said. No eligibility for parole. Foster was led away in an orange jumpsuit, hands cuffed behind his back. Renly didn't watch him go. She watched Vivian gather her papers. Watch the way Vivian's shoulders relaxed just slightly when the door closed behind Foster. Vivian turned, saw Renly, gave a small nod. Renly nodded back. Then she stood, walked out into the sunlight, got into Maeve's car. They drove past a stoplight where Reaper sat on his motorcycle waiting for green. Reaper saw the car, saw Renly in the passenger seat. He tipped his head slightly. Renly waved. The light turned green. They went separate ways. That evening, Renly sat at the kitchen table doing her math homework. Maeve was making dinner. The radio played something low and easy. Her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. Then she saw the area code, recognized it. The message said, "Got Harlow placed with a good family today. Thought you'd want to know. She's safe. Thank you for seeing her." Vivian. Renly read it twice. Then she got up, went to her room, stood in front of the framed birthday card on the wall. "You are the bravest girl I know." She touched the frame, the same way she touched it every night for 6 years. "I'm still working on it, Mom," she whispered. Then she went back to the kitchen, finished her homework, ate dinner with Maeve, told her about Harlow. Maeve smiled, the kind of smile that comes from watching someone become exactly who they were always meant to be. "You did good, kid," Maeve said. Renly shrugged, tried to look casual. "Just did what someone did for me," she said. That night, Renly lay in bed, window open by choice, door open by choice. The key with the wooden sun keychain sat on her nightstand. She picked it up, held it for a moment. 6 years ago, she'd put this key in her pocket and felt for the first time in 11 months like something belonged to her. Now she held it and felt something different. Not ownership, responsibility. Because she knew now what it meant to have a door open for you, and she knew what it meant to be the one who opened it for someone else. She set the key back on the nightstand, closed her eyes, slept through the night, present day. Reaper's garage, 10:30 at night, the amber porch lights still on. The camera pulls back slowly, reveals 3 motorcycles in the driveway. Carrick's, Beckett's, Thorne's, kitchen light on inside. The sound of low voices, laughter, coffee mugs clinking. They're planning, because 3 hours ago, Maeve had called Carrick about a bush voice. 14 years old, showed up at the library, backpack clutched to his chest, bruises on his arms. And Renly had sat with him, had called Maeve, had started the chain. So now they were here, in Reaper's kitchen, at 10:30 on a Thursday night, doing what they had always done, opening doors. The camera holds on the amber porch light, steady, warm, unwavering, a light in the dark, for anyone who needs to walk toward it. The answer was always yes. It just sometimes took 147 Hell's Angels to open the door. And sometimes it took a 12-year-old girl who remembered what it felt like to knock. Either way, the door opened. It always would.